Okay, so we have done the first question in the third one, right? That means the what factors are held constant, that part we have talked about. Am I right? Awesome then. Right, cool. So with this question, I think last class itself, we moved into competency 2 because supply, demand and all we talk about in competency 2. So the first question was what factors are held constant in drawing a market supply curve. Since we have talked about the question in the previous session, I'll be moving on to the next one. Describe how the income and substitution effects explain the law of demand. So before I start this question, I just want to ask how many of you tried this question out yourself before coming to this class? The PDF was there for about 2 weeks now in the Telegram group. Okay, Shifa has done that. Who else tried this question out themselves? Okay, great. Nazhat, Anjali. What about the others? Great, Mafaza, Amna, all have done it. I'd want pretty much everyone who's coming to these sessions attempt them themselves before coming here. Then only you can actually get the maximum out of whatever I'm explaining here. Because only by doing questions, you'll understand what are the doubts you have. Where you miss the answer. So that's why I asked you to try. And then anyhow, now we'll start the discussion. So you see here, describe how the income effect and substitution effects explain the law of demand. To answer this question, you need to first know what is this law of demand. So what is this law of demand? Tell me that first. Simply tell me what is this law of demand? Right, law of demand simply talks about the inverse relationship between two things, price and quantity demanded. Right, when price goes up, quantity demanded, what happens? When price goes up, what happens to quantity demanded? Quantity demanded would drop. When price drops, quantity demanded would increase. So this is what the demand law says, right? So first you should know what is demand law. That is the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded, the negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. That is pretty much very basic. You know that already. Now the question is, they're asking how substitution effect and income effect of a price change explain this demand law. So first of all, what you have to do is, let's say they are starting with, I believe the question starts with describe how the income effect and substitution effect. So I'll start with the income effect. So your description has to be like this. You have to first say how income effect explains the demand law, this negative relationship, and then move on to the substitution effect and say describe how this substitution effect describes the demand law. Since we are talking about only the description of how demand law is explained by these two effects, you don't have to actually define what is income effect, what is substitution effect, right? You don't have to actually give a definition. What you have to do is simply give a description of how income effect explains demand law, how substitution effect explains demand law, right? So your answer has to be like this. First of all, like I said, we'll start with the income effect. Now, when it comes to income effect, you need to simply know whenever there is a price change in a product, let's say there's a product and the price of that product is going up, right? Price of that product is going up. When that happened, the main assumption is, when it comes to demand law, one of the main assumption is we assume only the price is changing. Every other factor that decides demand will remain constant. Tell me few of the other factors which we assume to be constant when this price increase happens. What are these other factors of demand? Right, consumers' income, consumers' preference, taste, future expectation of the price of related goods, number of buyers in the market, and other factors such as maybe political scenario in the country, whatever the government is doing, whatever the personal preference, and all of those stuff, right? Now, when we talk about demand law, we say only price is changing. Every other factor here is constant. That means consumers' income is also constant. We are talking about income effect now. That's why I'm picking this consumer income part. We assume this nominal income, the monetary income of the consumer is constant, right? We assume that. Now price is going up. You see the nominal income of the consumer is remaining the same. If that's the case, what do you think about the purchasing power of the consumer? Will it increase or will it decrease? When the price of a product is going up, while the nominal monetary income of the consumer is still remaining the same, what about his purchasing power? Will it increase? Will it decrease? Will it improve or drop? Obviously, the purchasing ability of the consumer here will drop. Why? Because this guy is, let's say he was earning 2,000 rupee before the price change. After the price change also, this guy is earning the same 2,000 rupee. What would happen now? This guy with 2,000 rupee after the price increase can buy less. Why? Because the price has gone up. This guy's salary is still the same. That's what has happened to pretty much everyone in Sri Lanka right now. All products have gone up in price, but everyone is earning the same amount of money. What has happened? Purchasing power has dropped. Purchasing ability has dropped. For purchasing power, we give another name also. It's called the real income. Real income. So purchasing power and real income are the same thing. So here, this why the monetary income earned by the consumer, we call it nominal income, just namesake income. Right? Purchasing power of someone is their real income. How many goods they can buy with the money they have, real income. Now, when price of a product goes up, while the nominal income is constant, along with the other factors of the demand, the real income, the purchasing power of the consumer drops. Since the purchasing power is dropping, consumer demands less because their purchasing power has dropped. Right? So simply put, income effect simply says when price of a product goes up while the nominal income is constant, the purchasing power, the real income of the consumer will drop, hence they will buy less. Hence, the quantity demanded will drop. That's what the income effect says. And you see here at the end, price, quantity demanded, inverse relationship. Reason is this real income drop. That's what income effect is. And that's how income effect describes the demand law. Actually, this is one direction of price going up, quantity demand coming down. That is this. You can, or you have to actually explain the other thing also. When price comes down, how quantity demanded goes up. That works like this. When price of a product drops, while the nominal income is constant, the purchasing power of the consumer will, what will happen? Increase or decrease?
Increase.
The real income of the consumer is increasing or decreasing?
Increasing.
Increasing.
It will increase. As a result, consumers will be demanding more or less. Quantity demanded will increase or decrease? It will
Increase.
increase. So you see here again, price going down, quantity demanded going up. Inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded explained by the income effect. Is that clear? So now you have to describe it. So your description has to be simply what I have shown here. When price of a product goes up while nominal income is constant, right? While price of a product goes up, when nominal income is constant, the purchasing power of consumers will drop. The real income of consumers will drop. As a result, quantity demanded will drop. On the other hand, when price of a product drops while the nominal income is constant, the real income of the consumer will go up. As a result, quantity demanded will go up. This is how income effect describes demand law. That's what you have to write. Clear? Rahul, is that clear? Quick. Right. Then income effect is done. What do we have next? The substitution effect. How the substitution effect describes demand law. Now, it goes almost in a similar line like the previous answer. Here again, price of the product is going up. Right? Price of the product is going up. This time, with income effect, we took the nominal income of the consumer's income and said, since it's not changing, real income would change. Now we are here talking about the substitution effect now. So whenever price of a product goes up, right, while the related product's price remains constant, while the related product's price remains constant. So for example, I'll take a real world example and explain it. Let's say price of tea is going up. Quantity demanded of tea, we'll keep it as it is right now, no change. It's there just like that. Price of tea is going up. As a result, what will happen is when we talk about demand law, we talk about only one product, price going up of one product, how that product's demand comes down. At that time, we assume other factors that decide the demand of the product are remaining constant. For example, in this case, related product's price remains constant. So one related product or one substitute product for tea would be coffee. So when price of tea goes up, we have to assume price of coffee is constant. Price of coffee is constant. And let's write down the quantity demanded of coffee as well. Now what's going to happen is when price of tea goes up, while price of coffee is constant, right? One thing will happen in the market. We call that the relative price of tea will increase. What is relative price of tea? Relative price actually you learn in chapter 7, but to put it simply, it talks about relatively speaking, price of tea is going up. Right? If you understand it in that way, that's very simple. Price of tea is going up while the substitute coffee is still constant in price. What's going to happen? Now, relatively speaking, between coffee and tea has become more expensive. On the other hand, coffee has become relatively cheaper. Right? Coffee has become relatively cheaper to the consumer now. So what will happen in the market? People who were buying coffee will still buy coffee. People who were buying tea, since coffee has become cheaper and tea has become more expensive, relatively speaking, people who were buying tea will move and buy coffee now. They will move away from tea and buy coffee. As a result, coffee demand will go up and people have moved away from tea, so tea demand will drop. Now you can see when price goes up, content demanded drops. What is the reason? When the price of tea went up while the substitute products price remained constant, the relative price of tea went up. As a result, people moved away from this product and bought more of the substitute. The opposite is also true. When price of the product comes down, while the substitute products price remained constant, what will happen? Let me write this down first. When the price of the particular good comes down, tea comes down now while coffee price is constant. Now the relative price of tea has become cheaper compared to coffee. On the other hand, coffee, even though the price of coffee didn't change, relatively speaking, coffee is now a little more expensive than before. Why? Because tea price has come down. As a result, people who were buying coffee now will move and buy more tea. Why? Because tea, when the price of it dropped, the relative price of tea also dropped compared to coffee. So people who bought coffee are now moving away from coffee and buying more tea. As a result, tea demand would increase. Again, you can see an inverse relationship. An inverse relationship. Right? So what you have to write down is simple. When you explain how the substitution effect describes the demand law, you simply have to say when price of a particular good, like what I have given here, when price of a particular good increases, while the related product, the substitute product's price remains constant, this particular good's relative price will increase. As a result, people will buy less of this particular good and more of the substitute good. On the other hand, when price of the particular good comes down, while the related substitute product's price is constant, the particular good's relative price will increase, which means it becomes more expensive. As a result, in this case, I said it the other way around. When price of the particular good drops, while the substitute product's price remains constant, the relative price here would drop. As a result, it would become more cheaper, right? It will become cheaper. As a result, people will buy more of this product. Again, you see the negative relationship. That's how the substitution effect describes the demand law. So first thing you need to know, when price of the particular good goes up, its relative price goes up. As a result, it becomes more expensive, people buy less of it. When price of the particular good comes down, it becomes relatively cheaper, so people buy more of it. That's how substitution effect explains demand law. Is that clear? So you don't have to write this flow chart kind of thing, price going up, quantity coming down, all of that, but just description would suffice, right? You have to just write whatever I have shown here in words. As long as you do that, you are fine. So that's for 4 marks. So pretty much for income effects description of law of demand 2, the substitution effects description 2. Awesome. Then what we have is the, I believe, distinguish between a price flow and a price ceiling and give an example of each, right? So this is from which chapter? First tell me, this question is from which chapter? The 3rd chapter, right? Very good. So when it comes to this 3rd chapter, we talk about what? Government intervention in market. So what are the ways in which government intervenes the market? Mainly there are 4. What are those 4? Tax, through imposing taxes, providing subsidies, direct price control, and then price stabilization. So this price flow and price ceiling comes under which of those 4 ways in which government intervenes? It comes under price control, right? First things first, tell me another name we use for price flow. Another name which we use to refer to price flow is minimum price, right? Minimum price. Then for price ceiling, what's another name we give? What's another name we use?
Maximum price.
Maximum price. Okay. So here the question is, distinguish between a price flow and a price ceiling and give an example of each. 4 marks, right? So let's get down to it. First of all, can someone tell me what is this price flow? Oh, let me type it. Fair price for producers, price put by government to protect suppliers. Right. So everyone look here. It's pretty simple. This is how it works. When it comes to this price control, what happens is when normally in the market, demand and supply will decide price. Normally in the market, demand and supply will decide the price of the product like this. Demand curve, supply curve, wherever they meet, that will be the price and that will be the quantity in the market. Now, sometimes what happens is this price decided by the market might be, let's say it's 20 rupees. This 20 rupee price sometimes might be unfair to producers or sometimes to the consumers. At that time, government will step in to protect the party who was badly affected from this market. That's when government will come in and then they will set an artificial legal price disregarding this 20 rupee market price. That is called price control. And price flow means whenever this market price is unfair to the producer, now to protect the producer, government will step in and they will set an artificial legal minimum price. Right? Government will set an artificial legal minimum price to protect the producers. Now that's called the price flow. That's called the price flow. For example, if 20 rupee is unfair to the producer, that's the market price. It's unfair though to the producer. It's too low for the producer. So government will come in and they will set an artificial legal minimum price of, let's say, about 30 rupees. 30 rupees. And that's the minimum price. And when government sets this 30 rupee minimum price, what it means is in the market, hereafter this minimum price is imposed, fixed. No one can sell this particular good in the market for a price lower than 30 rupees. Right? The product can't be sold at a price lower than 30. The minimum price is 30. If the producers want, they can sell at 35, 40, 50, 100, 10,000 also. The lowest they can charge for the product is 30. They can't go below that. Why? Because 20 was unfair. To protect the producer, 30 is set as the minimum price. That is what minimum price. Right? Example for minimum price would be, sometimes regularly what the government does is they set something called minimum wages for labor. Minimum wages or minimum salary for labor. That is one example of government setting minimum price. Sometimes when the employers exploit these interns and give only 5,000, 6,000 salary, that might be the market rate, but government will step in and be like, 6,000 is too low to these laborers who are supplying you, their labor. So you have to pay them minimum of 10,000 rupees. If you want, you can pay 100,000 also, but minimum you should pay 10,000. So that is one example of price flow, because wage, salary is the price you give for labor. So that is one example. Another example might be minimum price provided for farmers for example, 1 kilogram of rice. 10 rupee, sorry, not 10 rupee, let's say 80 rupee minimum price for 1 kilogram of rice. Why? Because the market rate might be 60, which is unfair to the farmers. To protect them, government sets 80 rupee minimum price. So that is what a price flow is, and example also given. Is that part clear? Price flow. Then price ceiling means what? It's there to protect whom?
Consumers.
Price ceiling is another name is maximum price. Now that's there to protect the consumers. Here what happens is when the government sets, okay, let's start with the market. When the market price, let's say here it's 20 and that market price is too high for the consumers, government will step in to protect the consumers. They will set a maximum price actually, right? A maximum price. For example, to protect the consumers, no. So for that to be effective, government will set a price below the equilibrium. Let's say it's 15 rupees. So maximum price. Recently, they said 210 maximum price for rice. For sugar also, they set a maximum price. For anchor, there was maximum price earlier. Now they removed it. So likewise, government sets these maximum price for products which have a price which is kind of too much for the consumers, right? So here, let's say government is setting 15 as the maximum price. Now, you see what's happening here? Government has set an artificial legal price disregarding the market price to protect the consumer. And what has happened here? Government is saying 15 is the maximum price that can be charged for this product. No one can go and sell above this price. 15 is the highest ceiling price. If you want producer, you can sell for 10 rupees also. If you want producer, you can sell for 5 rupees also. If you want producer, you can sell it for zero, free also. You can't go a cent below 15. 15 is also fine. You can't go above 15. That's what price ceiling means. So what is price ceiling? When the market price is unfair to the consumer, government steps in, sets an artificial legal maximum price, ceiling price to protect consumers. That's called price ceiling. Example, maximum price for rice was set as 210. Maximum price for sugar was set at 230 rupees. Oh, I'm not sure the exact value. Just you can come up with some random value just out of your imagination. Anchor maximum price for 1 kilogram of anchor was set as 1,500 rupees. Something like that. So that's what price ceiling is. If you write that enough, you just define price flow, give an example, or I would recommend writing 2 examples. Price ceiling, give the definition and write down 2 examples. You're done. Is that clear? Right. The next question is a very interesting question, again from chapter 3 actually. Who pays most of the burden of a specific unit tax on producers when supply is inelastic? Explain your answer using an appropriate diagram. So you can't show me the diagram here. So what I'm going to ask you is, tell me when a specific unit tax is put on a producer when supply is inelastic, who bears most of the tax? Is it the consumer or is it the producer? What's your answer? Right. So getting back to the question now, who pays most of the burden of a specific unit tax on producers when supply is inelastic? Explain your answer using an appropriate diagram. So to answer this, your answer has to be something like this. So first you have to draw the graph. I'll draw it here. And since we are talking about inelastic supply, the demand curve can be a random one. You can just draw a demand curve just like this, no issues. But the supply curve you draw has to reflect the elasticity of supply. That means inelastic supply is what we have here. What would be the shape of the supply curve? Will it be flat completely? Will it be vertical completely? Or will it be flatter or relatively steeper? Or will it start from the origin point? Will it start from the price axis? Will it start from the quantity axis? Description is not just enough, right? Here they have asked you to explain using a graph. So you have to draw the graph. Will the supply curve be parallel to the price axis or the quantity axis? That's good, Anjali. So what Anjali has done is she has sent me, I think it's called a forward slash. This one. That's pretty much the right description of an inelastic supply curve. The supply curve will start from the quantity axis and look something like this. Like I said, a forward slash, right? Because that's what inelastic supply curve is. And first thing, you need to know that to answer this question. If you have no idea how an inelastic supply curve looks, that is from chapter 2. If you don't know that, this chapter 3 question you can't do. So like I said, all these stuff are interconnected. It's like watching a Marvel movie. You have to know what happened in some Iron Man movie to know what happens in the end game, right? Likewise, what happens in Thor Ragnarok at the end, you need to know so that you will understand what happens in Infinity War at the beginning. So likewise, you need to know what you have studied in chapter 2. A proper knowledge of that is important for you to answer a question from chapter 3. Okay, so like I said, relatively inelastic supply, the curve will be a forward slash curve, a relatively steeper curve, not a flatter one, a steeper curve, and it should start from the quantity axis. It should start from the quantity axis, right? That's that. Now, let's draw the equilibrium. Before the tax was imposed. So here you have a certain price, we'll call it P. Let's call this Q. Cool. Now we know that a unit tax is imposed. A specific tax means unit tax is imposed on the producer. Then which curve will get affected? Supply curve or demand curve?
Supply
quick.
curve.
Not quick answers. The supply curve. And it will shift to which side? Left or right?
Left.
Left. Yeah, obviously left. Obviously the supply curve, and it will shift to the left. So you have to draw the new supply curve exactly parallel to the old one. I believe mine is parallel to the left. So supply curve has shifted to the left. Cool. Now just mark the new equilibrium. So the price is here, let's call it P1, and quantity is here, Q1. Okay, fine. Now looking at this, we can decide who has or who is bearing most of the share. And one important thing, some 2023 students might not know this if you haven't started chapter 3 and have gone to this part. If you have gone there, you might know this. Okay, so this is how it works. Whenever we talk about this tax burden, who takes more, who takes less of the tax burden, we call that tax incidence. Whenever a tax is imposed, out of that total tax, who shares which part? Is it a 50-50 share, or consumer takes more, producer takes less, or producer takes more, consumer takes less, or the producer takes the whole thing, or the consumer takes the whole thing? That's what tax incidence is. And that is decided mainly by two things: price elasticity of demand, price elasticity of supply. Here we are talking about how tax incidence is affected by price elasticity of supply, specifically the inelastic supply. How to decide that? Simple. Now, consumer's tax burden is always the increase in the price due to tax. That is the difference between P and P1. And they are buying Q1 quantity, no. So the consumer's tax burden would be this area I have highlighted in red. Or let's go with another color, green. So this green rectangle is the consumer's tax burden. Why? Earlier they were paying this P price. Let's say that price is about, for example, 20 rupees, quantity is 100. After that, after tax is imposed, let's say the price went to 23 or 22. Let's say the unit tax by the government is 10 rupees. 10 rupee unit tax. Price went to 22. That's the new equilibrium price. Now consumer, their burden of tax is what? That extra 2 rupee they have to pay. And they are paying that extra 2 rupee for this Q1 quantity. Let's say that is 80. Just I'm putting just some values so that you can imagine that in your head. So 2 rupee extra for 80 units consumers are paying. That's their tax burden, tax share of the consumer. Cool. The producer's tax share, how you find that is very simple. This is what you have to do. First of all, you have to find out what is the price the product is sold at right now. That is 22. From 22, the producer has to give 10 rupee to the government. 10 rupee to the government producer has to give. So 22 is the price the producer gets from the consumer, minus 10 rupee. The producer only gets 12 rupee for the product. Producer only gets 12 rupee for the product. Before tax, how much did he get? 20 rupee. After tax, the producer gets only 12. So how to get or show that in the graph? Simple. You go to the new equilibrium. From the new equilibrium point, go to the old supply curve. What you're simply doing is you are going between the new supply curve. You're going from the new supply curve vertically directly to the old supply curve. And I believe you know this by now. The vertical gap between both the curves is always equal to the unit tax amount. Whenever a unit tax is imposed, the supply curve shifts parallelly, and the gap between both the curves, the vertical gap between both the curves will always be equal to the tax amount. That means between these 2 points, the gap will be equal to 10. In that case, once you are here, if you draw a line towards the price axis, if you draw a line towards the price axis, it will get you to the producer price after tax, which is this 12 rupee. 12 rupee. So you see here, producer's tax burden is how much? Producer was getting 20 before, now he's only getting 12. And for how many units he's getting that? 80 units. So this brown rectangle, or pretty much a square, is the producer's tax burden. Now, whose burden is bigger? which rectangle is bigger now? The bigger the rectangle, bigger the burden. So the producer bears most of the tax when the supply is inelastic. When the supply is inelastic, producer has to bear most of the tax. You can actually, without drawing the graph also, you can understand who gets most of the share, but they have asked you to draw the graph, no? So you have to draw a graph like this. You don't have to put values like I have. The value was, I put the values just for you to understand stuff. All you have to do is just put this P1 and maybe P2 here would be enough. But you have to highlight that this is the consumer share, this is the producer share. Okay, so whatever area is above the equilibrium, old equilibrium, would be consumer share, and whatever tax part is below the old equilibrium would be producer share. So if you draw this tax line, once that is done, you see this tax line, which part is above the old equilibrium price and which part is below the old equilibrium price. Whichever is bigger shows you that that party has or that party bears most of the tax burden. In this case, producer takes most of the tax burden. To give numbers, like I earlier explained, it is, I think, the new equilibrium price was 22, old equilibrium price 20, producer price was 12. So consumer's tax burden is 2 rupee per unit, producer tax burden is 8 rupee per unit, 2 plus 8, the total government tax of 10 rupee. So after drawing this, you have to give a description like what I have shown here. As the supply is relatively inelastic, even though tax is imposed, the producers can't change their supply as quickly as they wish, right? As quickly as they wish to. Hence, producers have to bear most of the tax burden and only give a smaller portion to the consumers. One example I can give is, think about a tax put on tomato farmers, producers. When the tax is imposed, right, the producers of these tomatoes, they can't reduce their supply because it's a naturally grown product. They can't control how much is harvested, how much these plants give. They can't control that. So whatever the supply they have to somehow sell it to the market. Just because the tax is imposed, they can't reduce the supply, store these tomatoes for a long period of time. It's impossible. In 2-3 days, it will all rot. So what do? They will bear most of the tax. And at a point where they can't do anything, where they can't bear anything more, they will pass that 1 rupee or 2 rupee to the consumer. That's what's happening when it comes to inelastic supply. Producer will bear most of the tax because they can't do anything with their supply. They can't change their supply. So what do? They kind of try to sell off whatever they have by increasing the price only a little and passing that tax over to the consumer. So that's what's going to happen when a specific unit tax is imposed on the producer for a product which has inelastic supply. Is that clear? So the graph you have to draw is shown, and the description you have to write down is also given here. Is that clear? So producer bears most of the burden of the specific tax when supply is inelastic. We just explained using a diagram. We used a diagram and also gave a small description as well to explain the whole thing. All good? Shall we move on to the next question? Right. So someone is asking, couldn't understand the vertical gap part. So this is how it works, pretty simple. Always remember this point. Whenever there is a unit tax is imposed, the curve will shift parallelly. No? The curve will shift parallelly. What will happen at that time is this vertical gap. If you take a particular quantity, let's say 100 units, earlier for 100 units, the supply was how much? Let's remove the demand curve. Earlier for 100 units, supply price was 20. Now, when let's say the tax is about 5 rupee, the curve will shift to the left. And this time for 100 units, if you check the price will be 20 plus 5, 25. The price will be 20 plus 5, 25. So you see the vertical gap between both these supply curves will always be the tax amount. Any point, you can take 50 also. For 50, let's say you might have had a certain price, right? Let's say for 50, the price was about close to 15 rupees. So for 50, for 50 quantity, price is 15. Now, for that same 50 units, the new price would be how much? 20. 15 plus 5, 20. Somewhere close to 20. Mine is not that accurate now. So it's close to somewhere around 20. So that's how always it happens, right? The vertical gap between two supply curves when tax or subsidy is provided will be equal to that tax amount or the subsidy amount. So I just use that to find who is bearing most of the tax or subsidy. Same goes for tax and same goes for subsidy, but mainly tax is always tested in your A levels. All good? Right. Next question. The following equations describe the market demand and supply functions of a commodity. Right? The following equations describe the market demand and supply functions of a commodity. So you have the demand equation, you have the supply equation, all good. And then you see the first question is calculate the equilibrium price, simple, and quantity using the equations. So using the equation itself, they are asking you to calculate the equilibrium price and quantity and show this equilibrium accurately on a graph, right? Accurately on a graph. Now, you need to know one thing. If they have just said graph without the word accurately, you could have randomly drawn a rough diagram like this in your foolscap sheet, in your answer script, demand curve, supply curve. You could have marked the equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity, and whatever the equilibrium price you found, you put here. Whatever the equilibrium quantity you found, you put here. You might have been okay with just doing that. But here what they did was they added the word accurately. Because of that one word, now you have to draw this graph of market, equilibrium and quantity and everything in a graph sheet, which will be provided to you, of course, in your A level. You have to draw the graph on a graph sheet. If you don't do that and just draw the whole thing on a foolscap sheet where you wrote down these answers, that's not right. Okay, Actually, that should have been right, but when they said accurately, you have to actually take proper intervals and then draw. It won't take much time, but you have to do it that way. Is that clear? So first of all, we'll first do the basic one, finding the equilibrium price and quantity. So QD, what is the equation? I think it was 100 minus 4p minus 30 plus 6p. 100 minus 4p minus 30 plus 6p. minus 4p minus 30 plus 6p. Am I correct? Or did I get anything wrong? These were the equations there, right? So what is the equilibrium price and what is the equilibrium quantity? Okay, this is in a normal class. I wouldn't do this, working, because you have done this so many times already. But since this is a paper class, and also I say this is also kind of a revision session as well, I'll just do it one time now. So to find the equilibrium price and quantity, the first step would be, right, step number 1 would be to make sure this quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. After that, you write down the quantity demanded equation. 100 minus 4p equals minus 30 plus 6p. And then you bring the p's to one side and the normal decimal numbers to one side. So you have 100 and you have minus 30. So we'll bring the minus 30 to the other side of the equation and the minus 4p to the other side. So minus 30, when it comes to the other side, it will be 100 plus 30 equals 6p plus 4p. 130 equals 10p. You divide this by 10. You do the same on the other side. Now you have price equal to 13 rupees. And this is the price when QD is equal to QS. That's what equilibrium is. Quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. When quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied, we know price is supposed to be 13. So we have found the equilibrium price. Now what do? You take this equilibrium price and put it in the quantity demanded equation in the place of price and find out what is the quantity demanded at this equilibrium price of 13 rupees. 100 minus 4 into 13 is how much? 52. That means 48 units. 48 units is the equilibrium quantity. How did I know that it's the equilibrium quantity? Because 13 is the equilibrium price, and at 13 we know QD is equal to QS. Now I know at 13 QD is 48, so QS also has to be 48. Now just to double check, I'll put it in the QS equation also. Minus 30 plus 6 into 13 minus 30 plus 6 into 13 is how much? How much is that? Why so late? Simple. 13 into 5 is 65. You add one more 5. Oh, sorry, one more 13. You get 78. So minus 30 plus 78. What do you get? 48 units. So you see, at 13 rupee price, QD is 48, QS is also 48. QD equals QS. So you don't have to do this step at all. Just by doing this, you find the quantity, you just put it and move on. Right? That's that. And then you see the question, they are asking you to draw the equilibrium on the graph. No. Now, you see, first, as they have asked you to show the equilibrium price and quantity on the graph accurately, you should take the graph paper, and on the graph paper, you have to draw the price axis, you have to draw the quantity axis. And one more thing I would recommend you, when you're drawing the quantity axis, always start from somewhere around here. Have some negative value space for the quantity axis, because the supply curve can start from a negative value. As you can see, minus 30 was the A value. So to accommodate that, have that negative space. So price, quantity, 0, and then you'll have to break the intervals accordingly for price and quantity demanded. Now here, one thing I want to teach you, you might know this already, but the thing is, usually when you are drawing a graph, a demand schedule and a supply schedule might be given to you. Yeah, normally that's how it is, right? They would give a demand schedule like this: price, quantity demanded. They'll give 0 price, what is the demand, 10 rupee, what is the demand, 20 rupee, what is the demand. Based on that, you draw the demand. Easy. Supply also same thing. But for this question, have they given a demand and supply schedule? Do you see a demand and supply schedule here? Unfortunately, no. You can't hear me. What's happening? Everyone can hear me, right? Earlier was there an issue? What happened? Whose mic was on? I didn't notice that. All right, cool. Gabri is 2023. I think some issue might be there. Okay, anyhow. Now, came back to this. I can't hear anyone. I'm on my headset also. If someone else's mic was on, maybe my volume was off. Right. Okay, getting back to this. Here you don't see a demand or supply schedule. Normally, they will give you a demand supply schedule and ask you to draw the demand curve, the supply curve on a graph, find the equilibrium. Pretty simple stuff, baby stuff. You have done this in your O levels or before that itself. In mathematics, you have drawn graphs for tables, no? But here you don't have a graph, sorry, you don't have a table, but you are supposed to draw a graph only with 2 equations. So here you have to actually create the table yourself. Create the table yourself and then draw the graph. Now to draw the graph accurately, right? To draw the graph accurately, you have to draw the demand curve, you have to draw the supply curve. Now remember this one thing. When you are drawing a straight line, a demand curve or supply curve, minimum you need 2 points. Minimum you need 2 points. But I would always recommend you to at least have 3 points just for ease of drawing. 3 points, okay? So first point is using equations, how to create a demand schedule. That's what I'm teaching now. First, always put zero price, right? Zero price, find the demand. So that is your first point, point number 1, right? And then find the maximum demand price. That is the price at which quantity demanded is 0. Put that price here. So if you go to the equation, I think the equation was minus 100 plus 40. No. So what is the maximum demand price? What is the maximum demand price? What is the price at which demand becomes 0? It's simple, right? You take this 100 divided by 4, 25, maximum demand price. Or else what you can do is you take the quantity demanded equation, make quantity demanded 0 and solve the equation for price. So it's going to be 4p equals 100, 4p divided by 4, 100 divided by 4, maximum demand price will be 25 rupees, right? So maximum demand price is 25. So you write that down here. So pretty much those two would be enough for you to get what do you call the demand curve in place. Those two would be actually enough for you to get the demand curve in place. But I would recommend you to take a third price also. Normally, I would recommend you to go the right 25.0, go to the right middle point, which is 12.5. But in this case, since 12.5 is like, 12.5, no, it's kind of, not so comfortable for you guys. Because of that, I would recommend you to go with something like 10 rupee or 15 rupee would be enough. 3 points, like I said, would be enough, more than enough. So in the demand curve, when price is 0, what is how much is the demand? 100 minus 4p. When price is 0, what is the demand? When price is 0, demand is 100. So that is, you see, now you have 1 point. You have another point here, 25 rupee, quantity is 0. And 0 rupee, quantity is 100. You have 2 points now. And for 10 rupee, what do you think? $60 units. So based on this, now you can draw a demand curve, right? You have to draw a demand curve. Now, when you're drawing a demand curve, you have to make sure the intervals, what kind of intervals you are going to take. So here I need to put 0, I have to put 10, I have to put 25 also. So I'm going to go like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, something like that. Because taking 5 intervals would be easier for me because I have 25 also, and 10 is also a multiple of 5. All good. I hope so, because I didn't look at the supply one. Actually, I should look at the supply one, then only mark the interval. So we'll do that as well. Supply one was, I think, QS equals minus 30 plus 6p. So for 0 price, what is the supply amount? minus 30. So this is why I asked you to have this negative space, the minus part. And for 10 rupee, what is the supply amount? Do you get one? I think you should, right? For 10 rupee, what is the supply amount? 30. For 25 rupee, what is the supply amount? You just put in the place of price, you just put 25. $120. Okay, 120. Right. Now all you have to do is, I think 5 rupee intervals are fine, right? Because here also for 5 rupee intervals, I can find proper quantities, no? So all good. So that won't be a problem. And remember, you are doing this in a graph sheet. So you will have one big box. Inside that one big box, you will have small boxes also. So every single rupee, if you are taking for 5 rupees, if you are taking one box, then for every rupee 1, 2, 3, 4, you will have small boxes. So that way you can accurately find the price and the quantity. That's why they have put that word accurately. Show it. That's why you are supposed to draw it in the graph. Once you are done with taking the intervals, all cool. And then the quantity also you have to take. I think I'll go with, since I have to mark up to 120, you see the graph, you see the quantity, the maximum I need is 120. So I'm going to go with 20. Equal intervals between each 20 mark, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120. Now I'm not going to draw the whole thing. It will take more time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just quickly going to skip. And the negative side also, we have to mark a 30. So this is minus 20. This is minus 40, I think. So right in the middle, you will have minus 30. So when you're drawing the demand curve, it will be from here, first point, 0 price 100. Then for 25 rupee quantity is 0. And then for 10 rupee quantity will be around this 60 rupee mark. So I'll just connect these 2 points. If you are drawing everything in a graph, everything would fall into place accurately, and you have your demand curve. Likewise, for supply curve also, 30 is the supply when price is 0, and then when price is, okay, 30, okay, and when the price is 10, it's supply is 30 now. Negative 30 is when the price is 0, positive 30 when the price is 10. So when the price is 10, it should be around here, positive 30, somewhere like this. So if I connect those 2 points, somehow I will get an okay-ish supply curve, I believe. What is the equilibrium price you guys got? 13. Right. So here's your equilibrium price, somewhere around here, and that looks okay, 13. And here is your equilibrium quantity. That is also somewhat close to 48. But in a graph sheet, if you are drawing, it would be perfect. The values would perfectly come as 13, and here it is 48. And that's pretty much what you have to draw. Right? The intervals are important. And all these other points which are important, I'll just mark them now. When you are drawing or showing equilibrium on a graph, you must show the autonomous demand part, the autonomous supply part, the maximum demand price point, that is here, the minimum supply price point, that is here. These are points you must show. This is the equilibrium point, the equilibrium price, the equilibrium quantity. These are the points that you must show when you are drawing a graph showing equilibrium. Right? All those prices, you have to mention them accurately and properly. You can actually ignore every other price. You don't have to show 20, 15, 10, this 20 quantity, 40 quantity. You can ignore all of them. But whatever I have marked in black, all those points, all those prices, all those quantities, you must show them properly. Otherwise, you might lose marks. Okay, that's how it is. So I took all this time because it's just one graph I'm going to show. I won't draw any graphs hereafter, but I just wanted to show everything that is important here. And also, you have to label the vertical axis, label the horizontal axis, mark the origin point as 0 as well, label the supply curve, label the demand curve, mark the equilibrium point also. All that I have marked in black, you must mark in the graph. Is that clear? And again, like I said, I took so much time. From equation, I have taught you now how to create a schedule, and from a schedule, how to draw demand curve and supply curve. This way, now you can pretty much do anything. From schedule, you can draw a graph, or from equation, you can draw a graph. But to do that, you have to create a schedule. And obviously, you might already know from a schedule how to derive a demand equation that you have done in the past now. So pretty much, this is what you are supposed to draw on the graph. And then the question is still not over. There's a second part where they have asked you to find the consumer surplus, producer surplus at equilibrium, and show them on a graph. Now, when they ask you to show them on a graph, you don't have to draw a different graph actually. You can just show them in the graph you have already drawn. So consumer surplus, what is the answer? And what is the producer surplus? Right. So consumer surplus, what is the equation you used? Maximum demand price minus. So here the question is about finding consumer surplus at the equilibrium price, no? Right? They're asking consumer surplus at equilibrium, producer surplus at equilibrium. So the equation, if you want, you can directly use the common equation that is used, maximum demand price minus equilibrium price into equilibrium quantity over 2. Or else you can use maximum demand price minus the buyer price, the consumer price, into the quantity the consumer bought divided by 2. And what is the consumer price at the equilibrium price? It's the equilibrium price, right? Consumer, they're asking you to find the consumer surplus at equilibrium price, at the equilibrium. So maximum demand price, we know how much is the maximum demand price. We found that to be 25. Now you don't have to do that separately, any working in the graph, it's already there. When price is 25, demand is 0. So that is the maximum demand price, 25 minus what is the price the consumer is paying at equilibrium? Consumer is paying 13 rupee at equilibrium. So 13 rupee is the equilibrium price, or the price the consumer pays at equilibrium. Multiplied by what is the quantity the consumer is buying at equilibrium? Consumer is buying 48 units divided by 2. Your answer would be how much? So it's 24 into 12. 12 into 24. So 12 into 12 is 144, I think. Then it should be 288 rupees. Is that correct? Or did I make any mistake there? Or another way to do the same thing is 24 into 10 is 240. Right? 24 into 10 is 240. And then 2 24s are 48. So 240 plus 48, 288 rupees. And then to find producer surplus, the equation is, you can write down, since it's at the equilibrium, you can write down equilibrium price minus minimum supply price into equilibrium quantity over 2, or else you can write down producer price minus minimum supply price into the quantity the producer brought, the quantity the producer bought over 2. So it's at equilibrium now. So the producer price, the price the producer gets at equilibrium according to the question is 13. That's the equilibrium price. Minus the minimum supply price the producer was expecting is 5 rupees. Into the quantity the producer buy is, the quantity the producer is buying here is 48 over 2. So it's going to be 13 minus 5 into 24. 13 minus 5 is 8 into 24. So 24 into 8, how much is that? 24 into 8 is, sorry, 24 into 10 is 240. I have to deduct 48 from 240. It's going to be 192 rupees. Is that clear? But it doesn't end there. They have asked you to show the consumer surplus, producer surplus in the graph. So you have to simply highlight it. Consumer surplus is which area? Consumer comes to buy at 25 maximum demand price, ends up buying at 13 equilibrium price, and buys 48 equilibrium quantity. So this triangle is the consumer's surplus. This orange triangle is the consumer's surplus area. I have found the area of that triangle here. The gap between 25 and 13 multiplied by 48. divided by 2, the area of the triangle, half into what do you call base into perpendicular height. Then the producer surplus area, producer came with minimum supply price of 5. Producer came with a minimum supply price of 5, but he ended up selling the product for 13 and he was able to sell 48 units. So the producer surplus area is this triangle. So once you are done marking, you have to just maybe put an arrow and say, okay, this is consumer surplus. This is producer surplus. That's what you have to do. That's what you have to do in the graph. And separately, you have to find the consumer surplus, producer surplus also, and write that down in the answer script. Clear what, Amna? Color it. Yes, you can color it. You can just highlight it, but yes, you can do that. But if you are using only one color of pen, you can't color them similarly. So drawing lines like this in different directions, you can kind of distinguish between the consumer surplus area and the producer surplus area. If you have black and blue, fine. In the graph, you can, for black, you can use to show the consumer surplus, and blue for producer surplus. Clear? So in one sum, in one question, we have done a lot, covered pretty much everything related to graphs and what do you call equilibrium. The only thing is we didn't show when tax is imposed how the curve will shift, how the equilibrium will change. That's like the thing that we didn't do here. Everything else we have done. Good for you anyway. In one question, from one question, you got to learn a lot. And one more thing I want to say now itself is that the equations for consumer surplus and producer surplus, don't get confused, because it goes like this. Consumer surplus is what? Consumer comes to the market. For every quantity they are ready to buy, they have a demand price, the price the consumer is willing to pay. Sometimes what happens is the consumer might be willing to pay a higher price, but the market price might be less than that. Market price might be less than that. In such situation, consumer gets a surplus because they were ready to pay more, they are paying less. So that's what consumer surplus is. And to find the market consumer surplus, we use this. The highest price the consumer was ready to pay, maximum demand price, minus what's the price the consumer actually paid. So for this, normally we take the market price, which is, we will just put the equilibrium price. But some cases when minimum price control or maximum price control is there, sometimes what happens is the equilibrium price might be different and the minimum price the government has set might be different. In that case, you might get confused which price I should take. That's why always I teach students, the concept is what you need to understand. Consumer surplus means maximum price consumer was ready to pay minus what's the price the consumer actually pays. Right? That's what we put here. Just because normally we use the equilibrium price in the equation, you don't have to always go and take equilibrium. Right? Always you have to take the price the consumer pays. At equilibrium, the consumer will pay the equilibrium price, market price. So you just put that. If there's this maximum price, minimum price, certified price thing coming up, in that scenario, you have to look at, okay, what is the price the consumer actually pays? Because at that time, producer might be getting a different price from the market. Right? That's why I always say, this is one equation that you can use, or put the other equation in your head. Maximum demand price minus actual buyer price, actual consumer price, multiplied by actual buyer quantity. Actual quantity the consumer is purchasing over 2. This would help you a lot in questions that you see in price control parts. Producer surplus also same thing. We normally write equilibrium price minus minimum supply price into equilibrium quantity over 2. But the idea of producer surplus is what? Producer comes to the market with a minimum price in their head. For every quantity they are ready to sell, they will have a supply price. But when they come to the market, what happens is, if the market price is higher than the price they were ready to sell the product at that time they will make a surplus. That is producer surplus. Right. So when we are measuring this producer surplus, the idea is the lowest price the producer was ready to accept for the product they are selling. And what's the other part? The price the producer actually got. So at equilibrium, it will be the equilibrium price. Generally speaking, we write this producer price minus minimum supply price into actual quantity the producer sold. So let's put down the producer quantity over 2. At equilibrium, both of them are the same. Because of that, you can get away with you writing this equation. Even when it comes to tax and subsidy situations, this equation is what actually works, but students don't remember this producer price. They always think equilibrium price is supposed to be in the equation. So they have to adjust the equation with the tax or subsidy amount accordingly. Right. So remember, these two are correct equations for consumer surplus. These two are also correct equations for producer surplus. But you need to know which one works well for which question. For normal equilibrium question, the first equation might be enough, this one. But maximum demand, maximum price, maximum price, minimum price situations, I would recommend you to go with the second equation. Right? With practice, you will understand. But always remember the idea. Consumer surplus means maximum demand price minus the price the consumer pays. Remember that. That's enough. And multiplied by the quantity the consumer buys. Just remember that. That will be enough for you. Is that clear? Something additional, but very important. That's why I just wanted to talk about it. Producer surplus also same thing. What's the price the producer actually gets minus the price the producer was expecting into the quantity the producer was selling. It's not always about equilibrium price. Actually learned a lot in today's class, sir. Very interesting. Thank you. You're most welcome. I hope everyone feels the same. So now, what's the time now? It's 5:20. So now I believe you might have received, how to put it, some idea of how to do questions from chapter number 2 also, and 3 as well. We talked about price ceiling, price flow, and then we went on and talked about the tax incidence part. All of these are pretty much like, how to put it, that's pretty much the crux of chapter 3. This is what you see, the price control, tax incidence. These are the parts which are kind of hard also from this chapter. And if you can easily find answers for question like the 4th one and write that down yourself, then it's awesome. You can do any question, right? And also, you see, when you are reading a question, you need to know certain parts. Here, this word accurately told me that I can't just draw a rough graph, right? That word accurately told me I can't just draw a rough graph, put the values and get away with it from in the answer sheet itself. It told me I'm supposed to draw the equilibrium on a separate graph sheet, properly taking intervals. It took time, but you have to do that if they ask you to do that. Okay. All good? What is 5:19 in Lucia? The time. Okay. Now, let's go to the next question, which is, again, another chapter 2 and chapter 3 is also involved. Yes, chapter 2 and 3 question from another past paper. I believe it should be around 15, 16, that time period. So you look at the first question. What factors decide price elasticity of demand for a consumer good? And they are giving you 4 marks for this. And they have simply asked you, what factors decide price elasticity of demand? So all you have to do is simply tell me, you guys tell me the answer for this question. Give me at least 2 points. Right. So someone said availability of substitutes, percentage of income spent on the good, time taken to adjust demand, number of substitutes available. Very good. My question is, do you just write down those points, or do you think you have to describe those points? What is this number of substitute, what it means? Do you think you have to describe those points as well, or just write down the points and be done with it? So as you can see, the answer to the question is here, determinants of price elasticity of demand. Right. And what I was asking is, do you just write down nature of the concerned good, or do you write down the description also? If it's essential, it's inelastic. If it's luxury, it's elastic. What do you think? Do you just write down number of substitutes available, or do you write down number of substitutes available and then go and describe it? Imaz, what do you think? Amna, Anfal, Nazhat, Niska. Just the points or description is required? Quick, quick, quick. Sharmita. Just the points only, because they didn't ask you to describe anything. They have just asked you to, what's the question? What factors are affecting price elasticity of demand? Right? That's the question. What factors decide the price elasticity of demand for a consumer good? So what do you have to do? Just mention the points. Nature of the concerned good, number of substitutes available and how close they are, percentage of income spent on the good, availability of alternatives, and the time taken to adjust. And also you can write down the addictive nature of the product, the definition you have given for the product. And actually they have asked you to, they are giving only 4 marks. That means you have to write only 4 points. That's it. So description is not required. Just the points are enough. Is that clear? Easy. 4 marks. And then you have a very, very interesting question Why is a downward sloping linear demand curve more price elastic at higher price ranges and more price inelastic at lower price ranges? What do you think the answer is? Don't say the answer, just tell me, do you think you know the answer for this question? Minha, no. For this question, actually Minha is talking about the previous one. That is, what factors decide the price elasticity of demand for a consumer good? For that, you can't get away with writing 2 points with description. No, they didn't ask for description. They have just asked what factors are deciding price elasticity of demand for consumer good. You have to write down 4 different points only without description. From the way you're asking this, I think you might have done a question where you had to write 2 points and give 2 descriptions. That is a question I think you might have had in 2019 paper. There was a similar question where they had asked you to describe the reason, something like that. We might be able to, let's do it in maybe next class. There was a question where they asked you, it was not a direct question like this. They had asked something like, describe the reasons for price elasticity of supply or something. There you had to write the point and describe the point. For that, for 1 point, 1 mark, with description means 2 marks. That's how the question went in 2019. This is, I think, 2016 or something. And coming back to my question, the second one, do you think you know the answer for this question? Do you think you know the answer for this, like I asked? Actually, the answer is, you can find it if you, probably it's in the syllabus also, even though it's not very direct, but it's in the syllabus. You can learn it when you learn about point price elasticity of demand here. So here you can see the pattern where when the price is higher, right, at higher prices, according to the question, you can see, what does it say? Why is a downward sloping linear demand curve more price elastic at higher price ranges and more price inelastic at lower price ranges? So if you come here, as you can see, at 40 rupees, 30 rupees, which are higher in price, you can see the point price elasticity is high. It's more elastic, right? And if you see lower prices like 10 rupee, or for example 0 rupee, you can see at 10 rupee the PED is 0.33. At 0 rupee it's 0. So when you come from a higher price to a lower price, you can see a drop in elasticity. When price drops, elasticity here is dropping. So that's what the question is. What's the reason for that? What's the reason for that? And the reason is pretty simple actually, but if you have no idea about this, you won't be able to answer it unless you have a proper understanding of what is elasticity, what is point price elasticity, how it works. If you know that in your head, then you might be able to come up with the answer. Because when I did this question, I remember doing this question some time back, right? I don't know whether this is a 2014 question because I remember doing it by myself, not to teach any students or something. At that time, I just realized, okay, this is how it should be. And then I wrote the answer, which is supposed to be the answer for this question, and then went out and checked some theory parts or somewhere. It was not in my handout when I was doing A level, but externally, I just did some small research and found out what I wrote was correct. It simply works like this. When you are measuring PED, specifically point PED, your equation is change in QD over change in price into the price at that point over the quantity demanded at that point. Now, if you draw a graph simply like this, you see, and you go out and measure PED, you can see one thing. At every point, A, B, C, D, E, all the points, when you are measuring PED, one thing is constant. That is, you see the slope, change in QD over change in price, is constant throughout every single point. That means this point, the variance of the slope is always the same, regardless of which point you take, because we know the demand curve we have in our syllabus is linear. That means the slope is constant. The variance of the slope is constant. So that's why you see change in QD over change in price part doesn't change for different points on the demand curve. They remain constant. Then you see you only have two parts in the equation. One is the variance. The other one is the ratio between price and quantity demanded. At every single point, you will have a certain price. For that price, you will have a corresponding quantity. And that is what's changing. You can see here, when you move from A to B to C to D to E, the slope doesn't change. The slope is just 5. 50 over 10 means 5. That doesn't change. But what is changing? At every point, price and quantity demanded are different. And especially what's happening is, when you go from a higher price to a lower price, as you can see here, price drops from 40 to 30, then to 20, then to 10. The numerator, the one on the top in the division, is coming down, right? And also the denominator, the one below the quantity, that is increasing. 0, 50, 100, 150, 200. So what's happening is, the price, which is the numerator, it's dropping. Quantity demanded, the denominator, is increasing. As a result, what will happen? But the slope is constant. So as a result of these two changing, price dropping and quantity demanded going up, what will happen? The final answer will drop. The final answer will drop. For example, I'll just take you through a small example. Let's say a division where 10 divided by 2. Your answer is 5. Let's say the numerator is dropping to 8. 8 divided by 2 is how much? 4. So similar thing is happening here. The numerator price is dropping from 10 to 8, means your final answer would drop. At the same time, quantity is also increasing. The 2 is also becoming, let's say, 4. It's not 2 anymore, it's 4 now. So your final answer is only 2. So you see the drop. So that is the reason why we see this drop in elasticity when price comes down. What is the reason? This ratio between price and quantity demanded keeps on reducing when price drops. Keeps on reducing when price drops. And actually, if you take my handout, the answer is given. In a linear demand curve which slopes downwards, variance of the slope is constant at every point, and elasticity changes from point to point as the ratio between price and the quantity demanded decreases. The PED decreases from infinity to 0 when moving from left to right along the downward sloping demand curve. Left to right means this way. Just read through that for a minute. I'm getting a call. Right. So is that clear? Anjali has said percentage of income spent at higher prices is high. Thus, consumers are more sensitive for price changes at higher prices. Hence, speed is more elastic. And yeah, that is also something that works because, but in a way, that's not actually correct also, right? If I'll explain that also here. That's a very good way of thinking. I appreciate that way of thinking. Very good. But look here, before I finish the session for today, I'll explain one more point. If you take elasticity and if you take a linear demand curve, in this demand curve, there is one point where the consumer's expenditure is at its highest. That is at which point? A or B or C or D or E? Which point? Consumer's expenditure is at its highest. Consumer expenditure means price into quantity. And remember, consumer expenditure is also producer's revenue because what the consumer spends is the producer's revenue. That is also price into quantity. If you take each of these points, at point A, 40 is the price, quantity is 0. So 0 revenue. Here 0 revenue. At point B, 30 into 50 is 1,500 revenue. And consumer expenditure is also 1,500. 20 into 100, 2,000 is the consumer expenditure and producer revenue. Again, when you go to D now, you see price is less, 10, quantity is 150. Again, it's just 1,500, not more than 2,000. Or, you can see that. And at 0, price, obviously, 0. So you can see here, when the prices are higher or prices are lower, the total revenue of the producer and consumer of the producer are not at its highest. Actually, it is at highest when you are right in the middle of the demand curve. So if you have a downward sloping curve, wherever you have this unitary elastic point, at that point you will have the highest consumer expenditure and producer revenue. That is also a question that can be asked. Maybe in the coming classes, I'll take such a question and just talk about it. But the way Anjali said her answer, rather than taking the total expenditure, if you just take price of the product, then at higher prices, that means it takes more share of the consumer's income, then demand will be elastic. At lower prices, that means it takes only a very small percentage of their income. So consumers are more inelastic towards the product. If you word it like that, your answer would be perfect. You can write that also. Clear? Okay, Anjali. So if you are talking about the percentage of consumer income spent on the product, you shouldn't take the total expenditure of the consumer. You should take just one product's price and say this product price, what's the percentage it's taking from consumers' income. If it takes a higher percentage, then elastic, lower percentage, inelastic. That is one way of answering. Or else you can go with the answer I just showed you here. That's actually the one that is given in the syllabus also. So that's why I gave you this. Clear? All good? And I think with that, we'll wind up the session for today. And one more thing, this week, there will be an exam MCQ paper, including questions from mainly chapter 2 only. There will be 20 to 25 exam MCQs. So that paper I will put up tomorrow or day after tomorrow. And that question set will be taken into discussion in next week's class. And yeah, probably next week's class. And we'll be finishing off the rest of these questions as well. Along with that, I will give you more part 2 essay questions, including chapter 2 and 3. And since we are almost very close to your exams, we have to quickly move through the other chapters also, chapter 4, chapter 5 and stuff. So we'll do that as well quickly. Okay, so in this, we have about 2 more questions to discuss that we can quickly finish off, and then you'll have to do the exam tomorrow or Thursday. I will put the papers on both days. Actually, that's chapter 2 MCQ question. I'll be giving that to my 2023 class students also. The Sunday batch students already have done that. Saturday batch will be doing that tomorrow or day after tomorrow. So that paper you'll be doing as well, so that I can discuss the questions for everyone. Right. So with that, I'm going to end the session for today. See you all in next week's class. Have a great week ahead. And also Edmodo, if you're not there, I will put up a class code for these paper discussion students. You can enter the code and get there and access the paper and do it online itself. Once you're done, you will get the correct answers and also the marks as well. Discussion will be done next week. Cool. Sure, Anusha, we'll do a lot of questions like this. You're most welcome. See you all next class.